Sitting by the Fire, a podcast on ancestral wisdom, medicine, heritage, and transformation by Anna Shoyom. Hello, hello, good afternoon or good morning or good evening, depending on when you're connecting with us. This is the newest episode of Sitting by the Fire. And today, my dear guest is my colleague from Ancestral Medicine, Joseph Shumway. If I say your name well. Yay!
Yes,
Thank
Shumway.
you, Shumway. And would you please present yourself, Joseph? Because I think it's a challenge when someone wants to tell who we are. And I prefer to ask everyone so you tell who you are today and what is it that you do in this beautiful life.
Thank you, Anna. I'm Joseph Shumway, and I am currently living in the United States. I live in the south part of the state of Utah. So I live near the Red Rock National Parks that are very famous in Utah. And these are the ancestral lands of the Ute and the Southern Paiute and the Dene peoples. And they're very sacred, special places here in the desert. And being able to learn how to live well in a desert climate is a very beautiful opportunity to kind of really attune to the ways that the ecosystem is so balanced and very sensitive. And so this is a very special place that I'm really grateful to be, where we get to spend a lot of time outdoors. And for myself, I am down lineage from primarily Welsh and English immigrants who came to the United States in the mid-1800s as part of a little wave of Mormon converts who came to the United States and settled in Utah, Wyoming, and Idaho in the Intermountain West. And most of my ancestors are from there. I do have some early American colonizers, as well as French ancestors. My last name, Shumway, is an Americanized French name of Chamois, and that's my people, primarily Celtic peoples, ancestrally. And I grew up in the Mormon faith tradition, and I experienced kind of a dark night of the soul, faith transition, coming to terms with my sexuality here almost 10 years ago, that things really started moving and transpiring for my journey. And so that is kind of the tradition that I come from. Professionally, I work both as an ancestral healing guide. Like you, Anna, I'm a certified Ancestral Lineage Healing Practitioner, a ritualist, and I'm also a professional accredited genealogist. So I became interested in genealogy and ancestor research when I was just a teenager. I was about 12 years old. And that became this profession that I really wasn't expecting to do. I had other plans for a career, and it just kind of magically happened that I became this professional genealogist. And I've had a really beautiful, fun career in doing that. And so when ancestral healing work kind of like came into my life, it kind of floated in very quickly after I began transitioning away from Mormonism. I got divorced and really was just in this place where I don't know what to make sense of from a spiritual perspective anymore. Like all of the foundational framework that I'd grown up with no longer really felt true or resonant for me. And so it was like, what am I doing? Where am I going? And then I listened to a podcast one day, and Dr. Daniel Four was the guest speaker talking about ancestral lineage healing work. And it just lit a fire in me. And it was just so exciting to hear some other perspective that involved ancestors, which I knew a lot about, but then to bring in this other concept of animism that I was also starting to also find, I was also beginning to explore Buddhist tradition and some of the other Eastern traditions that had some of this animist language and some of this like non-binary, non-dual framework. And so to hear kind of this lens of weaving ancestor work and healing work into that really became exciting for me. So I signed up with a class for Daniel, and this was my first time teaching, learning from him was during the pandemic. He had just shifted to online teaching,
Yeah, yeah.
and it just really became exciting for me. And I did the course a few times there, and then wanted to become a practitioner in the work. So yeah, I've been doing that. And so I still do a lot of private genealogical work for clients, but I love doing healing work, and I love blending the two when it becomes possible. And I love writing. I have a Substack and also a little podcast, and trying to just bring more insight around this beautiful work of connecting with ancestors and the living world and reclaiming an earth-centered spiritual practice and reclaiming that animist framework and seeing the world that I believe is so default to who we are as humans. And we just find so much peace and belonging in that way of relating with the living world and the unseen realm. So
Yeah,
there's
I'm
a
with
little.
you there. Absolutely. It gives a sense of connection already, like connected with all the living beings. It's not just me, a human above everything, but like there is a weight into existence maybe when we are in connection, and in a way that's attachment. Like we're literally made from the elements of the earth. So it's not like something we make up completely.
Yeah.
I really enjoy your telling who you are. And is it okay if I ask a question? I'm really
Yes.
curious
Yes.
because I had a theory of change when I was in university. I studied philosophy, and my theory of change was that maybe there are two ways change can happen. It can be like an abrupt change from A to B, or change maybe like adding up small things and small steps, and then it becomes visible, and we become like aware of what has changed in us. So then we initiate a change
Mm.
based on that. And maybe there is also a third one, which is the two together, like things building up and then the change comes. And so I'm really curious because you mentioned the framework and the spirituality you've grown up with. What was that brought you to question that, or the change that was building up in you?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think for me, it was a series of small things that started building. And a big part of that was identify as a gay man. And so in the Mormon culture framework, that's not acceptable. And it's viewed as more historically as an illness, but then now it's viewed more as like, oh, a challenge that you're being tested, like given and tested. So it's fine, it's natural, but just don't pursue it, don't act on it is the terminology. And so kind of repressing that part of myself all of my life, believing that it's something wrong that I can fix or correct or somehow diminish through adherence to strict, obedience and teachings. Over time, that just really became, I couldn't repress it anymore. And so it just really became alive within me. And I came to a place first where I'm like, okay, I really had this really deep moving experience where I really felt the divine give me permission to accept and embrace that part of myself. And at the time, I was interpreting that through the lens of how I saw God. And I still interpreted that I can accept this part of myself and God's going to help me hold both. I'm going to be able to hold this acceptance of myself and still hold this faith tradition. That didn't last very long. But what happened with that is one of the real click things was because I started accepting and embracing that part of me. It began allowing energy to really move through my body in a different and new way.
Mm.
And what happened was I started to trust the intuitive knowing that my body had the ability and capacity to sense.
Mm.
And from there, I think a big shift that happened was I started to recognize a lot of things that I've been taught, the constructs, I'm holding them so tightly up here, but my body is saying, no, that's not real. That's not truth. And I can feel that in my body, but you learn in that cultural framework to just really resist the body's intuitive knowing in exchange to hold to the mental constructs of the framework. So for me, it was like that embracing my sexuality was a real important part for me to like, oh, what I sense in my body is true.
Mm.
That then creates this, oh, but I feel now that this idea, this construct isn't true. What does that mean? Like, and then, so it started to unravel other pieces of the framework just around how the narrow way that I defined God, or the narrow way in which, you know, Jesus's identity was like built in, or gender rigidness, or other things that just started now to realize like, that's not feeling true either. Wow. Okay. So now what can I do with that? How can, and so I didn't realize this at the time. I didn't have language for any of this, but now I realized like I was allowing the divine to use my body as that intuitive instrument to move into sense to things that were truth on a larger, grander scale. And softening the rigidness of the mind and the ego to then like open to seeing the natural world and the cosmos in a much more beautiful, expansive way. And so it just, little things added up to this big poof shift one day.
Yeah.
And it's been a big journey since then.
Yeah, it sounds like, for me, it sounds like an inclusion of the body and God and intuition, but on a very different scale. Like also allowing that maybe other existing persons, other than human persons, can be persons. Like I think when we spoke about an animistic ethic or animistic worldview, I always tell to my clients that it's something complementary to whatever you believe in, because faith is really important for us. So it's not against it. But I really love when we can find that, I call it like the salt and pepper of life or something like that, that, oh, you're a being as well. You may have an opinion about things and we may communicate. So it's really so touching for me when you say that coming to this intuitive part in the body and attuning with that, that's actually that allowed this change to blossom in you and act upon that. Because I think intuition is something really important, possibly also in genealogy search. Wouldn't you think so?
Mm-hmm. Very much. And I didn't recognize it as much before that transition of my spiritual framework happened. And now when I do research, I really notice like, oh, I'm sensing this, like, oh, I'm actually getting an insight around this person, this historical document that I'm looking at on a screen or in an archive. It becomes a portal for me to kind of like sense some information about that human and their lived experience, which then sometimes gives me clues to know where to go find them next. So it becomes it becomes a real little light, kind of in a sense that like I'm following this little moving light in the darkness, and then using that as a way to kind of solve mysteries more more quickly, or just more expansively, like finding things that I wasn't expecting to find. So yeah, it becomes a real important tool for me.
Yeah, yeah. I imagine. I'm very amateur in genealogy. I have some trials that I did, like trying to build up things. I know that I lack some information on my mother's side, for instance.
Mm.
I could connect with living people. I just didn't do that for the moment. So I'm kind of pushing to do that because I don't have relationship with them. But I remember like, and possibly you say yes or no, or what's your experience? That's my question. Like when we connect also with the ancestral lineage healing worker, when we open this space to come back to relationship with our loving wise ancestors, there's just like information pouring into in the genealogical research. For me was like being able to locate a grave that was from 1932 from my late great grandmother,
Mm.
from my father's side. But it's like, wow. I mean, do you find this also in your work that I don't know, how do you blend ancestral healing with genealogy?
I find that it's something that can go in two different directions. Sometimes one of the things we always tell clients when they're doing the ancestral lineage healing work is you don't have to know a lot about your family. And
Mm.
for people that may have been adopted, even, you don't have to know anything in that sense. Because our body can connect and intuit with those in the unseen realm, and we can gather information in that way. What I do find is that it can be helpful for people sometimes who need something to anchor to in the physical realm so that they can kind of then like move into the unseen realm a little bit. It helps them feel a little bit more confident if they know some names, if they know
Yeah.
a timeline framework that these ancestors lived, and maybe a place or places in the world where their ancestors lived. It helps them know, okay, I have some ideas. I can now feel a little bit more confident. Because then sometimes if we use genealogy to kind of give people a little bit of a foundation, what can happen then is as they step into this space of the liminal and connecting with these ancestors and getting information from guides, they'll start to get things that they know they didn't know, but that complement what they just learned. It's also interesting, too, from the other side now, if people don't know much, starting this process of connecting with the ancestors and the healing work, what then happens sometimes if they start doing genealogical research, the ancestors are kind of like helping guide this process. So they start to find
Mm.
documents or a grave site, like you said, or things where then it's like, oh, these things are happening, or like a relative contacts them just out of nowhere and like, hey, I have some information, whatever. So things start to move and then they start to find information. They're like, I saw this place when I was journeying and I find this record from my ancestor from this town in Europe somewhere, and they Google it and it's like, oh, that's the mountain I saw. Like, so they start to
Wow.
find things that help them affirm that what they're sensing is real, that they're not making it up, that they're really. So I find like it can work both ways. Like we can use genealogical research to help us, like step into the work, or we can use the work to kind of like
Mm.
move the genealogical research.
Mm. Oh, I love that.
Mhm.
Yeah. And how far can you go back with genealogical research? Because
Yeah,
within the ancestral work, it can be, I mean, eons. I could say like really, really far back in time. It's really difficult to find data from that
yeah.
period of time. But also, I usually say that just as you said, if there is no story, it doesn't matter. It's not the story that we need that the healing can happen. It's our presence, it's our connection, and the benevolent, loving, helping ancestors who can do the healing. But sometimes we do stay with this question mark in the head that, what was there? What happened there? So what's your experience? How far following the data lines and doing the research and following the little fireballs that you see that, oh, it's that way? How far can you go back as a professional researcher? Because that's like, wow. That means for me that you're living of that. And it's like, wow, you have to know a lot about genealogical research as compared to a normal human being who doesn't know anything about that.
Yeah, it will depend on the where your ancestors are from,
Okay.
and the historical impacts that may have impacted record keeping about your people. So for most people, for instance, with ancestors from Europe, there's a lot of history with Christian churches keeping records about the different sacraments and things. So that was important in the Catholic tradition. It was important in Orthodox, the Anglican tradition. So a lot of religious culture kept records about people. So in Europe, we can trace ancestors oftentimes back to 1700s, 1600s. There are some places in Spain or Portugal, for example, where records go back into the 1500s, or Italy sometimes. However, it becomes a little bit different if your ancestors were like indigenous American or indigenous to the Pacific Islands or Australia, where written records was not part of the culture, but oral tradition was. And so it can be challenging sometimes for indigenous people because there's no written records and the oral traditions were lost, so that we can kind of sometimes find where we can't go back very far. Similar to those who have enslaved African ancestors. In Africa, they would have had the oral traditions of the family lineages. And to this day, groups in Africa, people can recite their lineages for many, many, many generations just from memory because they're taught that. But people that were taken and brought, as enslaved people, lost those oral traditions, and then there weren't the records kept about the enslaved people the same. And so people who have enslaved ancestors sometimes can only go back into maybe the mid to early 1800s. And then there's experiences where people who have Jewish ancestors, where so many records were destroyed in the Holocaust. So there's different historical impacts that can show up for people depending on your ancestors. And that's hard sometimes when, for myself, I can take all of my lineages back very far, and then other people don't have that experience because of how history impacted their people. And so that's, some insight, but that's where also I find it really important that because regardless of where our ancestors are from, we're going to run into a place where there are no more records or documents about your people. Exactly. And so that's where we can then reach into the liminal space, connecting with our people, connecting with ancestor guides. And then we can start to kind of shift from records here to connection in the other realm. And that's really what's most important, because I find the genealogical records, they can be helpful to give us a sense of information, just to, like I said, a foundation to help us kind of do this work. But they can also sometimes give us clues about storylines, cultural troubles that our people may have experienced. And so sometimes they can give us clues that we can then bring to our ancestors and say, hey, I found this document. Is there information you can give me about this? And sometimes they can say, oh yeah, at that time period, our people had to migrate and immigrate somewhere else. That was really hard. They had to assimilate. They had to give up their language and their culture out of fear that they would be persecuted. So we can sometimes use the documents to then bring questions, and then use our connection with the ancestors for them to give us more insight.
Mm, absolutely. Absolutely. It's so important. What I'm thinking about is, why do you think it's so important that we have this connection with our ancestors, even if we don't know who our biological parents are, or the circumstances that we've been born, or many things can happen. But
Mm-hmm.
why is it so important to pursue this connection or coming back to it?
Mm. I feel the word that really comes is belonging.
Mm-hmm.
I feel we as humans, we just innately want to feel belonging. And I think that we're supposed to feel belonging in many ways. We're supposed to feel belonging in a human community, in a non-human community with our non-human friends and kin. And then, as we see and witness in other earth-centered cultures, connection with the ancestors is very important, and seeing those ones also as another community. And we're energetically connected with our ancestors, our blood ancestors. We can be connected to other non-blood
Yeah.
ancestors too. But our blood ancestors have a very special energetic connection to us. And I think that when we connect with them, it helps us feel that, wow, I belong somewhere. I belong to this lineage of people who have a lived experience that is very vast, very deep. There's a lot of wisdom, a lot of knowledge there, a lot of love that we can then tap into and have as a resource to support us in our own lives. And so in our Western culture, that real lived relationship with the ancestors has not been present for many, a few thousand years for most of us. And yet, that's still very alive for a lot of other indigenous and intact earth-based cultures. And they can use that as streams of belonging. And when we feel belonging and connection, it calms this need to consume. It calms this need to have to extract and frantically try to fill our lives with other material things and other superficial things that I think is really at the heart of this crises in our world today. We've extracted too much.
Yeah.
We've filled our lives with things that don't make us feel happy and really fulfilled. And so that's what I would say with there.
Yeah, I think I agree, because there is like a hole that we want to fill, like substances or objects or whatever. No, but I think it's very common that when we um, accomplish a dream or something, then on the other side of the door of the dream, there's again this vastness of, oh my God, what's next? No, like, what am I going to do? And I think I would say it's a pandemic in a way, that fight against resting and integration, allowing the body to, just do that. And okay, everything is fine. I have enough. I don't have to do this and this and that, and just run after another experience, another course, another thing. I say it because I'm always learning something. So I'm there also. It's not because I exclude myself. We can explain many things, but I think that felt sensation of arriving and belonging, that's something that we all look for to find, and it's beautiful when we can find it. I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious, how was it for you when you entered this realm of ancestors after possibly knowing so much from your researches, but did
Mm-hmm.
it shift somehow? What was your experience of coming
Mm.
to connect with them?
Yeah, it did shift. And as I mentioned, I became very fascinated with ancestors' genealogical research when I was a teenager. And I could sense ancestors' spirits. And in the Mormon faith, genealogy is important. And there's a belief in that religion that um, we do genealogy research so that we can find the names of our ancestors who didn't get to learn about and accept Mormonism. And then they have beautiful big temple sites where they will do rituals for yourself, but then also you then do the rituals on behalf of the ancestors. And so you're kind of doing these rituals for ancestors, and you're kind of giving them an opportunity to accept Mormonism in a sense.
Yeah.
And there's a beautiful aspect there. There's kind of a creepy, like, non-consensual aspect that it feels like to some too. And that was a real important thing for myself, like as a teenager and in my adult life when I was very devout in the faith. And what I've since had happen, part of my journey and shift was learning to be able to relate with the ancestors in more of a two-way experience relationship. Whereas before it was like, I thought, oh, I'm sensing an ancestor. That means they want me to do this kind of proxy work for them. And so it's kind of like, oh, I'm here doing this for you. And it's kind of like a one-way thing. I'm just sending you this little gift, this little blessing. And it's like, good for you. Go me. I did the thing. There's also a lot of that brought into that where it's like, oh, I did it. Yay. Look at me. But now it's kind of this relationship where they're there wanting to connect with me too. And I can have that. But the also part of the other thing here too was I didn't realize that I had this, what I call ancestral amnesia, where I didn't even ever think about my pre-Christian ancestors. That was a huge shift for me when I stepped into this ancestral lineage healing work. And the way Daniel teaches it is we connect with old, wise, ancient, loving guides, ancestors, to help steward the healing work. The first time I connected with this kind of an ancestor, this ancestor guide, it was magical and it was very powerful because I had never felt this connection with an ancestor who could bring so much unconditional love and just magic and just being like, wow, and watching them kind of like watching them, just sensing in the connection space, being able to witness them working with the earth and these beautiful rituals of ways that they're healing the lineages and things. And it was like, it was very mind-blowing for me to kind of then relate with those kinds of ancestors and build relationship with those earth-honoring ancestors that I never thought about. And I never had the ability to even like question them. It was almost like learning in history class, those pre-Christian, pagan, Iron Age people. It was almost like they were just other kinds of humans. They weren't even like Homo sapien. They were just kind of like, oh, primitive peoples.
Yeah.
Weirdly, that's how we're kind of taught in our culture about those ones. So that was a big shift for me in how I learned to relate with the ancestors in this particular work.
I was having goosebumps when you spoke about this connection, the first connection with that ancient ancestral guide you connected with. It's really such a beautiful experience when one can come to that relationship of reciprocity and giving, but also receiving, because I think a large part that we just give. Also in our lives, receiving does something different to us. Know that even in a equal relationship where we try to be in an equal level with the other person, sometimes it's so difficult to receive. Like, oh, no, don't give that to me. No. And it's like, when you are in that space, it's like, you're literally asking for a blessing and you're given. And it's like, oh my God, really? This is for me? Or I don't know. That's just like, so I think it's a beautiful teaching also, like, in a way. I love how Daniel and his colleague and our colleague Shannon usually says, they just become an average-sized human person. Like, it really humbles when we receive those gifts that our ancestors are holding. And I think that on that part of the time, my discovery is that they had the same problems that we did. like in a different scale and different perspective, obviously, pre-Christian and even older ancestors. But it was really like, okay, yeah, who's loving me? Who's not loving me? Who's going to take care of the cattle? What's going to happen? The wars? I don't know. It's just like, okay, we're humans at the end. We have the same problems, but the difference is a different solution, that they have. I like to call it like having their own council of elders in that connection space and come. And I don't know how was it for you, but for me, in my family, we had some connections with the elders. And of course, they wanted to tell us what to do. I was a rebel, so I was like, "Oh no, I'm going to do my way. Thank you." But it was not this way of not even accepting, but like listening. Maybe the stories that would have been really interesting about this was my interest, how the war went, how did you survive, what happened with those who died, who remembered them. No, nobody was talking about it. And I think that today in our present culture, it's difficult for people to talk about difficult things that touch us, because we don't want vulnerability on the table. Let's just not touch those topics and so on. And I think when we speak about ancestral connection, it's all on the table, because this is who we are. So it's not like, okay, I want to appear in my best outfit to greet my granddaughter, but yeah, that's my granddaughter, but this is my life. I'm not going to leave my life behind to connect with you. And that's a beautiful value for me.
Yeah, I relate with what you said about having this council of ancestors that we can go to and really gather a lot of wisdom, because, yeah, they experienced a lot of similar things to us in different ways, but a lot of the same emotions that they had to sit with, and experiences around loss and grief and scarcity and strife and conflict. They had to experience all of those things, and so they can bring a lot of wisdom as to, this is how we would tend to it in my lifetime. And it does create this way to, in our culture, we don't get the opportunity to really sit at the feet of elders and to learn from them, like you said. Like, I remember hearing stories from like my great grandparents, some of them that I knew, or like great aunts and uncles and older people in my family. I remember listening and hearing stories, but our culture doesn't hold that eldership, that elderhood state, to where we can really be shepherded and stewarded with that wisdom.
Yeah.
And so it's really beautiful to be able to then reclaim a little bit of that experience of being able to sit at the feet of wise ones who can really give us insight. Yeah. And sometimes the wisdom, I'm like, I don't know how I'll do that. Thank you. And then other times it's like, oh my God, I needed that. Like, that makes sense. Like, I can do that.
Yeah. There are both experiences. Absolutely. But I also find, and I'm curious how you see that it helps us to kind of embrace growing older and win this culture of eternal youth, because how can someone who is eternally young become an elder? It's like, you need the wrinkles, you need whatever you have, because that's the body's way of measuring time. That's like all those experiences that a person who's still alive will have. I think it's one of the beautiful teachings about eternity. Exists. It's something that we have, but in a different way, and it's important to live the way we are. What would you say to someone who is maybe entering from the genealogical research, but also kind of wanting to savor a bit ancestral lineage healing? What is a good entry point? What will you recommend when someone approaches you?
I recommend I oftentimes will just start the work with people, and we in our work we help guide people through an assessment of 4 principal lineages. And what oftentimes, if people have done some genealogy research, I'll help them just map out this family tree and
Mm.
just here's your father, grandfather, great grandfather, here's your grandmother, her mother. So I'll help them map out a family tree. And this creates a framework and a foundation for them with information they know. But then also, I like to help people understand, like, okay, let's just see if you can just take a little bit of information that you have just to kind of ground yourself, like some names, maybe places where they lived, where they were born. Just take those things. Let's see if we can just let go of the other things for right now. Because some people come and they know a lot about their families. That can sometimes get in the way a little bit. So it's like, it's a balance of like, let's use just a little bit to kind of help you kind of hold on to one hand here and then work with the process with that information. Because sometimes if we bring too much information in our heads about our family, it can make it difficult for us to trust the new information that's coming through a little
Mm.
bit. Because sometimes what's on the documents wasn't correct sometimes.
Correct. Absolutely.
And so we
Okay.
have to give some space that sometimes people lied. Sometimes people didn't give the information themselves. A friend gave information or a family member about this person to the record keeper. So sometimes the records may not be accurate. So we want to give some space that let's let some additional information come. And then if it creates a conflict, let's go back to
Yeah.
the ancestors and see,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
help me understand
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
usually what I say is like, let's use a little bit and let's then like soften to like allow for some new to come in.
Hmm. I like that. Yeah. And I also like that you say that sometimes the records are not to be trusted because, yeah, sometimes they were like omission, the truth, like
Hmm.
in many spaces, there was a possibility. Hmm.
Hmm.
And what is, if you can just pick one, because I know there are many, but what would be one like really heartfelt, deep, important thing that you say that this is what ancestral lineage healing has brought in your life, brought to you? And why would you recommend to someone to start this?
I'm going to listen for a moment. It's allowed me to see more magic in my family and my
Mm.
ancestors
Mm.
and give my ancestors more space to grow and expand themselves. And that's been really beautiful. For example, my father's father, my paternal grandfather, I knew him fairly well, and he died 15 years ago about, and almost 20. Working through this work, he's become such a magical person and being, and he's nothing like he looked or acted like, when he was incarnate on earth. And that's been really magical for me to kind of witness his growth because the lineage healing work has given him that space and ability to heal and to elevate and to become so much more vibrant and magical and a true guide for me. I don't think he would have had that same capacity to show up for me and my other family members the way that he can now.
Mm.
And so it's just really beautiful. I think that's the biggest thing that comes to mind.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I love to share the personal stories also, but I think maybe that will come in another time as we're ending toward our time together today. Thank you, Joseph, for accepting the invitation, and thank you for sharing your magic with us. And if you want to check, Joseph's website is here down. So maybe you need some advice in genealogy research. I think he'll be very happy to support everyone.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Anna. My pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. And we'll be back. Bye. Have a beautiful time.
Bye-bye.